So, theologically speaking,
hello and welcome to Theologically Speaking. I'm Kyle Leon Henderson.
and I'm Father Ian Elliott Davies.
And today, Father, I've got to tell you, this has been an episode that I'm kind of dreading it because I'm so far out of my wheelhouse. I have no idea what half the words mean in the discussion today.
Okay.
Okay, disclaimer to the listeners. If you don't have a pen and paper, go grab one now. Just put it on pause. Go grab it because we're navigating waters I've never touched.
Deep waters.
Deep waters. But I was making a joke earlier that this is the first episode where we are a fully adult podcast for adult brains. Would you disagree? Adult
brains.
An adult brain. So the heading that we went with today is the challenge of modernism and the Enlightenment. A question put forth to me a few weeks ago by Father Nathan Vale. Mm-hmm. He wanted to know about 19th century biblical criticism. That was sort of open-ended a little bit, but he wanted your brain to be picked apart on that. And as the person who picks your brain, I'm inadequately prepared to do that when it comes to 19th century biblical criticism because, needless to say, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on that in school.
Well, but you will have spent a lot of time on the 19th century.
That's true.
Which is, one of those very formative eras in history.
So where do we begin? Like, what am I supposed to think of?
The long 19th century, because it begins in 1789 and it ends at the beginning of the First World War. That's the end point. And it's an age of questioning.
So wait, hold on.
Yeah.
You said it ended at the First World War?
It ended in 1914 with the outbreak of the First World War.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And
intellectually speaking.
And it started in 1789. So 11 years before the 19th century.
Right.
And 14 years after, so.
Yes.
Okay. And continue. Sorry, I just wanted to wrap my brain around that a little bit.
There are revolutions going on in all kinds of spheres of life, in the sciences. Evolution is coming to the fore with Charles Darwin and the origin of the species. Eric Hobsbawm, one of the most eminent historians of the 19th century, who died not so many years ago, described the long 19th century as the age of revolution, the age of capital, and the age of empire. And those are three distinct periods in the 19th century.
Because in 1789, we were just wrapping up the Revolutionary War here in America.
Right.
And during that time, there was the French Revolution. America had fallen all apart, and we were in the middle of a civil war. And then by the end of it, the entire world is engulfed in war.
Right.
And we've had the Industrial Revolution, the advent of the car, the advent of the plane, the advent of telephone, advent of electricity.
Yeah.
So there is a lot that happened. And then Darwin is telling people that we're evolved from
apes.
Yeah. And everything started from one single organism. So that's interesting. So, of course, that would inevitably have an impact on Christianity.
Oh, yes.
Or on belief all around, not just Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, probably.
And what do we see the church doing? Well, the church sometimes puts on a defensive kind of front, like the Roman Catholic Church, for instance, in an age when people were questioning all kinds of authority and saying, do not trust given authority, you need to question everything. Then that's the very time when the Roman Catholic Church defines papal infallibility. And the time...
And I want to just stop you there with that instance. Yeah. Were they wrong for doing that?
Yes,
that was absolutely wrong.
The papal powers had been diminished immensely by the Italian, what we now know as Italy, was just lots of little...
Well, and at that time, too, Again, going through the history of the Episcopal Church, we are derived from the Church of England. And then once the Revolutionary War happened, we changed our name to the Episcopal Church because we no longer are the Church of England because we're not England.
Right.
We don't sort of look to the Pope to figure out what we're going to do theologically.
Right.
And there's many others. There's Methodist Church,
Mm-hmm.
Calvinists, and Quakers and Shakers and
Baptists.
Baptists. There's a lot of groups that didn't look to the Pope. So how did it affect those groups too?
Well, everyone was affected by the Enlightenment, the age of Enlightenment, and the discovery of science, the discovery of medicine, the discovery of and the invention of all kinds of. You mentioned the Industrial Revolution. Well, there are swings and roundabouts. There are theses and antitheses. Antithesis and synthesis, and all of that kind of philosophy is crucial to this era.
I don't know. I think about devoutly spiritual people at that time or in that era,
Right.
where things were just kind of coming up and developing, and wars were happening over things that were not concepts we even thought about prior to that moment. And
Right.
you get all these new developments like
There was
the cotton gin. I mean, that changes everything with labor on a farm, whatever.
Right.
Was that a scary time for people?
Yes, there
because
were
I mean,
crises.
nothing has
many
ever
crises.
progressed that quickly in
Right.
history, and
Right.
then all of a sudden, here you are in this time when the colonies are saying we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore.
Right.
And, and then France is like, well, let's do that too.
The questioning of authority and
Mm-hmm.
what is a civil society?
Yeah.
What makes a culture?
So if-
what makes for a nation state?
I guess if you're really trying to, go inward and decide for yourself, what is it that God's calling me to do during that time? That's a confusing time and kind of scary. Okay, so you got me there. I didn't care about it, and now I do. So we're here. I love it. I love that I needed to get that, and you gave it to me. So,
Right.
So now, the challenge of modernism. What is the challenge?
Well, we're in the postmodern era now, so we're looking back. That's something crucial to always keep in mind, our context from which we view things. And we're looking backwards through history now.
Yeah.
And we live in the postmodern era. So what modernism is it's up for debate. It's up for a good argument. I would say, because I come at it from a philosophical point of view or a theological point of view, also a literary point of view. T.S. Elliott is the quintessential modern poet, I think, and The Wasteland and the four quartets, those are all quintessentially modern poems and works of art.
And I don't really know a ton. I know some of his poems, but I don't know a ton of his background. Was he pretty spiritual in his personal life, or
he very famously converted to Anglicanism and became a devout Anglo-Catholic. He had been raised by a Unitarian family from New England and moves to Britain and works as...
he became so Anglican he couldn't even stay in America.
He couldn't stay in the States. He was fed up with the United States and he said, I'm going to good old Blighty and I'm going to be an Anglo-Catholic as well.
Fair enough.
We've spanned an incredible, huge period of time, by the way, going from the Age of Revolution through to T.S. Eliot.
That's true, yeah.
Just want the listeners to be aware of that we're taking in big chunks of time.
So why do they attribute it then? If it does go for that period of time, why do they attribute it to the long 19th century? Why did they?
Why is it called the
Yeah.
long 19th century? Because it starts so early.
But I mean,
And it
but
ends
why
so
is it
late.
why is it attached? What is it about the 19th century that
So much happened
it's
during
attributed to that? Like, I guess, is it Victorian England? Is that have something to do with it?
the Victorian Empire, because it's not just England.
That's
it's
true.
the empire.
She spread out far
She
and wide,
ruled
didn't she?
2/3 of the planet at one stage.
She seems like a hoot at a bar.
There was a very interesting article about her spirituality the other day that I was looking at online, and Queen Victoria was an eminently private
Yeah.
individual who kept her religious beliefs very, very. She played her cards close to her chest, her ample bosom.
I took a class on her in college. It was really interesting to see how neurotic she was at times. So, and I guess being the world empress of the world, really.
Right.
I mean,
Well, the Empress of India.
the empress of India, and you know, the queen of lots of places, and
Right.
you know, and you have this neuroses about your own beliefs, and you're influential. I mean, we know in this country the leaders are far more influential than we give them credit for,
Right.
just by saying and thinking and believing things. And then we have all this other added pressure of the world is changing and we're developing.
The Industrial Revolution.
And it must have felt like the 1990s a little bit, when
Right.
everybody started getting dial-up in their house and you could talk to anybody all around the world whenever
Right.
you wanted to. It must have felt like that.
Well, and
a
it's
little bit,
interesting
to have
that you
that
say
kind of
that,
connection.
because there's also a reaction against that, isn't there? You know, with the development of the internet and everything online, there's a reaction against that. People who want to write letters by hand,
Yeah.
who want to actually engage in literary works that are books rather than Kindle.
It feels almost like Latin, like we're desperate to hold on to it.
Right. And during the Industrial Revolution, the whole Romantic movement comes about because of the Industrial Revolution. It's a reaction against mass
never thought about
industry. Yeah.
I never thought
Well,
about it in that terms.
That's
That's
what
really
Lord of the
interesting.
Rings is all about. The entire plot of Lord of the Rings is the baddies are like the machines, the ones that live underground, and I can't remember what they're called now. The orcs. It's the orcs. Yes, they're like very industrial. They've got hammers and nails, and they're kind of torturing everyone with machinery. Whereas the hobbits are in the Shire, which is romantic and beautiful, and the trees are the Ents, and they carry history with them.
That calls to mind something, and I hope this doesn't get us too far off topic, or it might be right on topic. In every situation of progressions, there's always people who just want to stay still.
Yeah.
And the people who are helping to create progress and farther reaches, and you know, having influence in farther reaches and touching other people with your influence, they sort of bristle at those people of like, why can't you just pick up your feet and walk with us, like, and see that this is what we're called to do? How are we supposed to feel in that way? Like, is there one right party, one wrong party, or is there equal validity in both perspectives?
One of the crises that occurs is a crisis of confidence in that there is a plan for the future.
Yeah.
Because religion has been called into question ever since the Enlightenment. The entire idea that God has got a plan for the universe is now in question.
Yeah.
And
Is that? I mean, I understand that it seems like it's in question, but is it truly in question if you're?
No, I don't believe it is.
Because I was like, but that, I guess that's what and I don't use the word. I'm not saying politically conservative, but the conservative people who bristle at progression of
Right.
of like changing what was because God has told us what it should be. they're conservative about those
well,
things.
all of those questions are pulled apart during the 19th century. They're the very basis of intellectual pursuit is pulled apart. Psychology as a subject flourishes with Freud and in a much later time than the 19th century.
But would you say that every time that happens, the push and the pull of everything being called into question, we always inevitably see that everything's just fine?
The synthesis
Don't you think
of everything.
so?
Well, yes.
Going there is
ultimately,
fine, is what I mean, you know?
Well, progress is one of the big sort of watchwords of the 19th century, that everything is about progression and making progress, and we're actually getting better and better and better. Well, that all came to a crashing end with the First World War. That made people realize, no, we hadn't got better. So much for the idea that all wars were caused by religion. Well, now we have a world war that was not caused by religion, but by the shooting to death of the Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, who was the head of the Habsburg Empire at the time.
Well, and I always thought it was interesting how America got into World War One. The ships kept getting under attack, and our leadership can say no, it's not time to get in. It's not time to get in, and the adversaries just kept bullying people.
Right.
And it was just, I don't know. It just
Tell me more, because I don't know enough about the U.S.
And this isn't my area that I studied more prominently, but American ships the cargo ships. They weren't warships. They weren't anything. They were just taking cargo to Europe. They kept coming under attack from Germany.
Oh.
And everybody's like, they just attacked our ship. And the president was like, well, it'll be all right, basically. He's like, well, we'll have to wait and see. That was probably an accident. And it's like, it was no accident. And then they attacked another one, and then another one. And finally, we were just like, you can't just keep killing our people, you know? We're going to get in this war. And that's how we got in the war.
Right.
And it was just interesting that had not, like, the war had nothing to do with America, but they were bullying the ships at that. At that time, it had nothing. It was
right.
They were just flexing their
so
powers.
America was coming into its own as a world power
and it was,
at that time.
And it was that was sort of when America sort of went fully against the grain, because the argument against getting involved with that was because our forefathers, George Washington, they said, don't get involved in foreign affairs. That will never serve you well. Stay here. And then it got to the point where we couldn't. It was decision by decision basis to lead to where we are today, being the world superpower. But many can argue we had no choice, because it was because, like World War II, we were attacked. They attacked Pearl Harbor. So what were we supposed to do? You can't ignore that. So it's just interesting that at the end of this space, it wasn't just about grievances with one particular person anymore. It was, you're in my waters. You're near my space. Or whatever. It was you didn't. Leadership and world politics didn't care to implicate other people.
So are people becoming more possessive about their territory? Is that
maybe? Do you think so? Because you're from the UK,
right? And
the UK is kind of persona non grata about colonialism.
Oh yeah,
So was that important in the United Kingdom's colonial pursuits, the territory of owning everything? And I was always romantically mesmerized by the phrase that Great Britain is the empire that the sun never sets on, and it's beautiful to think about. But then you're like, oh, but it's because they conquered everybody all around the world, and they have islands on every.
Yes, but what have the Romans ever done for us?
Right, exactly. Well, that's true. It was they started it, really. They gave Queen Victoria the idea, right?
Right. But they brought central heating. It's a
Well, and don't forget the Greeks gave us our current road system.
It's a Monty Python sketch. What have the Romans ever done for us? Central heating. Well, apart from central heating, what have the Romans ever done for us? Straight roads. Well, apart from straight roads and central heating, what have the Romans ever done? Aqueducts. And it goes on and on and on. Big empire, yes, of course. Slavery, the subjugation of other peoples, other nations, all of those things are evil and wrong. But, empire brings with it a lot of good things as well.
Yeah.
And that's something that we don't seem to want to acknowledge these days.
Well, would you say that the 19th century is sort of where all of that, the good and the bad, was put forth? And I guess nobody had any possibility of not thinking about it after that point, because the socioeconomic stuff with our Civil War in America, you didn't have the opportunity to not think about it, because if you were a man of a certain age, whether you had slaves or not, you went to war to fight about it.
Right.
And imperialism was happening, and, it probably affected taxes. It probably affected, with wars, everybody was recruited or drafted. So,
right.
Would you say that the 19th century forced these new thoughts on everybody in one way or the other?
I think everyone was caught up, whether they liked it or not, in these questions, yes.
And the second part of our heading that we sort of labeled this in our pre-production meeting, we said the challenge of modernism and the Enlightenment. Where does the Enlightenment portion come in?
The Enlightenment is kind of the successor to the Reformation, I always think.
And when you say Reformation, what is that defined as? I'm going to stop because I heard everybody watching me like, what? No, I got you.
Okay, right. Reformation. So during the Middle Ages, there were a number of people who believed that the church had become corrupt.
Well, that was thanks to the Crusades, right?
Well, that's a generation earlier than that, even. The Crusades are kind of the 10th, 11th centuries, aren't they? But the church and the state and finance and money and power and authority, all of these things are jumbled up. And again, what have the Romans ever done for us? Well, some bits of that jumbled upness was good, but other bits were profoundly bad. There was lots of room for corruption, for selling indulgences, for selling religious freedom at a price.
So in that you mean there's a state, for lack of a better term, a state religion, and you have to follow that state religion unless you pay.
We've got to be
for the
really
right.
careful about how we use these terms, because we today say church and state. There was no distinction between the two.
And that is something that we've talked about in the past.
Right.
That I still have a little bit of a complex relationship wrapping my brain around.
It's difficult to get.
Because I'm American, and
Right.
This country was directly developed to not have it so intertwined.
Right.
And the thing is, it's not intertwined in other countries. It's not two things intertwined. It's just one thing.
Right.
So that's where my brain gets really confused sometimes about that, because even if they were intertwined, they would be still two different things.
We think of government and religion, and we think of faith and politics and church and state, and to us they seem to be very distinct, very discrete individual areas and subjects, whereas in fact they're very, very grey, and culture, for example, spans the whole width of religion and politics and the church and the state and government. And
I think I took us a little too far off topic with my questions, but to just sum it up, the
The
Reformation
Reformation
was
is reforming the church, cleansing the church, if you like, of the corruption that had been around during the Middle Ages.
gotcha.
And so, as the Reformation is, people are settling down after the Reformation.
So it took them a couple of centuries to get over
It's
the
a
hangover from
long
Reformation.
time. Long time. There are some parts of the world where they still haven't got over the Reformation. They're still fighting those battles about authority in the church and that kind of thing.
And no, we're over here going to Starbucks on a Sunday afternoon, and they're still fighting about it.
Right. Yes,
So-
exactly. I'd much rather be in Starbucks than fighting a war
Well,
of
and
religion.
how did that impact the Enlightenment? Like, how did that?
As the Reformation settles down, as people settle down, then people begin to ask questions about science, and they begin to explore. They begin to wonder about, well, where did we come from?
How does accessibility fit into all that? Because because it's at a certain point, the church, and correct me if I'm wrong, I may be wrong on the languages, this and that, but like the writings were in Greek and in Hebrew, and then at a certain point they all kind of fell into Latin, and they were in Latin, and you needed the priests to...
I don't buy that.
You don't buy that at all?
No. Because, I mean, that's a very particular way of reading history. I would say your ordinary, everyday churchgoer in the Middle Ages, they were as literate as anyone else, because they would go into a church building and they knew how to read the text of the church building, the architecture.
So even if it was in Latin, they knew how to read it.
Well, what I'm trying to say is, if they would see in the stained glass windows pictures of stories, then they could read that and were as informed as...
Gotcha.
They may not have been able to read and write in Latin, but they knew what the stories were.
Well, I guess that does make sense, and I've never thought of it like that. But then still, with it becoming you being able to read in the text,
Right.
and then you also with King James translating it into English,
Right,
finally,
right.
that did have a deeper, more nuanced accessibility to it, right?
Well, that's like the internet, the explosion of the internet, being able to read the scriptures in your own language instead of in Latin and Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, to have them in English.
Well, and wouldn't that, I guess maybe it is during the time of Enlightenment when people started interpreting the Bible in different ways. I guess they've always done that, but it started to become common to just keep on and keep on and keep on.
Well, that was one of the arguments that arose, and why some people in the church would say, it's really dangerous to have the Bible in English, because what's going to happen? People are going to start asking questions, and they're going to want to know what this is and what that is and why we do this.
And was that bad for certain people for them to ask questions?
The jury's still out, I think.
And where does that fall?
It's like the invention of the internet, only it's the invention of the printing press. That's the real sort of...
the printing press was just like taking a match to a hayfield, wasn't it?
Yes, that was the real kickstart for the Reformation. And politically, that came about at just the right time. And so people started writing pamphlets and disseminating all kinds of...
Was there corruption in that? When people start writing pamphlets, I know
There
that there
could
is.
be.
I know that we have this debate over preachers who fly private jets today, but it's the same concept of spreading the word for your own benefit rather than spreading the word for Jesus.
Who are the preachers who have private
the
jets?
mega churches in Texas?
Well, we don't have them.
No, not at all. No, we didn't subscribe to that kind of Christianity. Yeah, we're at the wrong church. Yeah.
Oh, click on the PayPal button.
But I guess did that happen? People start sort of trickling in their own message of changing and forming people's minds.
Well, there was a turn to the individual. At the same time as the protests, hence the word Protestant, the protests about corruption in the church, at that very time there was a turn to the individual as well. And René Descartes, who will play quite a role in the Enlightenment.
That is a big theme in our current modern day religion. I mean, even Nathan Vale, the person who gave us the idea for this podcast episode, he preached this morning on faith being like a kaleidoscope. When you it's so individual that people coming up and born into Christianity now, they're going to just see it as sort of something that gives them a lot of space for their own spiritual growth. And I guess it was in the Age of Enlightenment where that sort of started, right? Before then, you subscribed to this religion and you did it by the letter.
There was much more sense of community and society and the culture being an amorphous, huge entity. And individualism was not something that was particularly prevalent. I mean, there were outstanding individuals. That's what history's made of.
Yeah.
But
and we know them, right? We know them like
the historical figures.
Like John Wesley and is one who started the Methodist Church, and then
much later
Calvinists.
Yes.
John Calvin started.
John Calvin, William Tyndale, Jan Hus in Czechoslovakia. What is the Czech Republic today?
And I guess I might have to not look at this through our own filters of modern day, because like today we are in an era where everybody has a TikTok, everybody has an Instagram, everybody has something new to say, but that just might not be the truth. Like if you deign to say it out loud, you became a Calvin or a Tyndale, like you said.
But given that everyone has TikTok and Facebook and etc., who are the voices that we should listen to today?
Oprah.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Well, you see,
I got you on that.
I thought you were going to say somebody like Michael Sandel, from Harvard or something like that.
But
she's
I'm sorry.
Wonderful. She is wonderful.
You've given me Fanta, and this is a heavy subject, so I make jokes.
That's good.
But yeah, continue.
Oprah.
No, not with her.
Oh,
your continue with your coherent message.
Oh, well, people who stand out in history generally come up with ideas that are largely unrecognized in their own time. I mean, John Calvin was just one among any number of reformers at that time.
Sorry, I shouldn't ask this because I might take us even farther off track. But I'm curious, and that's what I do. People like John Calvin, when they want to reform, how did people call them heretics?
Oh yes.
I mean, because you think about it, because it seems, if you look at it from a bird's eye view with no stake in it involvement, Jesus Christ looked like a reformer for Judaism. And now Calvin is coming to reform again. And then they're in the Reformation. And is that the fear in the Enlightenment, that people are bastardizing Christianity by thinking deeper and outside the box?
There's an element of that, sure. There is an element where people are frightened at what's unknown. And the Enlightenment is saying, all of your certainties from the past are up for grabs. The existence of God, the plans that God has for the future. All of these things are called into question.
Right.
There's the teleology of history, which is that history has an aim, a goal to which it's heading. All of that came into question. And
So how did was there any resolutions? Was there any trepidations resolved, or are we still in the middle of those trepidations?
we're still in the midst of many of those questions.
But did we move on to a place of peace and acceptance of a lot of the things that came up in the Enlightenment, or
It depends where you are. I think in the middle of the 20th century, the story went something like this. Religion is dying, and the intellectual sphere is going to prevail. We've seen that is not the case. In Myanmar, religion is playing a major part in what's happening all around the world, whether it be fundamentalism of one sort or another, or just people who want to ask religious questions.
well, and even in this country, and I don't mean to bring politics into it, but in the leadership, I'm not talking politics, I'm just talking governmental leadership. There's a lot of people saying that religion is dying, and there is oppression on a religion, but 90% of our federal leaders identify as Christian, so that's just not true. And in that 10%, there are some Jewish faith people, and there
Right.
are some very, very small numbers of those people are of no faith. So
Right.
the faith and religion is not dying,
Right.
even though people have said it. So they've been saying it's dying since the Enlightenment in the very
Yes.
long 18th or 19th century.
Well, there's still a strong movement today for secularism, and saying that religion is coming to
Is
an
that
end.
wrong? If we have a shift towards secularism, is that bad?
Personally, I think so. Yes.
You do. And
Yeah.
what does that look like? What does the bad of secularism look like?
It's a lack of imagination, I think.
How do you define secularism, actually?
I would define. Ooh, gosh, right.
Because when I think secularism, I think, so, depending on how you define it, having an Instagram account could be secular, and having a TikTok could be secular, but we're using those as tools. Actually, that just popped into my head to ask that, and as you know, I can see it in your eyes, behind your eyes, you're like, that's too big, that's too much. So don't even answer the secularism question.
Right.
That's going to be the next episode. So
Okay.
we're going to go into a whole episode of secularism.
Richard Dawkins, secularism, science versus religion. We're going to, in the red corner and in the blue corner, we have.
It'll be a full melee. We'll sell tickets.
Yes.
And whoever wins, that's just who we have to listen to from
Yep.
then on.
Yep.
There we go. But anyway, so to wrap this up a little bit, because I think we've gotten to a space of understanding, or at least I have, and that's a feat, of understanding the challenge of modernism and the Enlightenment. So the challenge is the topic. The resolution is what? How does that affect us today? When I walk into church, how does the challenge of modernism and the Enlightenment, how does that affect my life? And how does that affect my fellow parishioners' lives?
That we're still able to worship alongside sometimes complete strangers, and still we have a common language, a common faith that we share, and perceptions about the world, and we are self-reflective creatures who have spirits, souls, minds, consciences.
But that's good, right? That we do have
Yes.
a spirit by which to have a personal relationship with God, independent of the religion we
Yes.
practice. So,
Yes.
sounds like the Enlightenment was great.
It was.
What do you got over there?
This is a poem by R.S. Thomas, the Welsh priest and poet, called In Church. Again, going into a church when nobody else is there and taking time to listen to the silence and asking, what kind of silence? In Church by R.S. Thomas. Often I try to analyze the quality of its silences. Is this where God hides from my searching? I have stopped to listen after the few people have gone, to the air recomposing itself for vigil. It has waited like this since the stones grouped themselves about it. These are the hard ribs of a body that our prayers have failed to animate. Shadows advance from their corners to take possession of places the light held for an hour. The bats resume their business. The uneasiness of the pews ceases. There is no other sound in the darkness but the sound of a man breathing, testing his faith on emptiness, nailing his questions one by one to an untenanted cross.
For more information about St. Thomas the Apostle Hollywood, visit our website at stthomashollywood.org. Don't forget to spell out Saint, S-A-I-N-T. You can also visit our Facebook page at St. Thomas the Apostle Hollywood. Visit our Instagram page at St. Thomas Hollywood, that's St. Thomas Hollywood. Father Davis also now has a TikTok. Follow him at Canon Ian Davis. That's spelled CANONIANDAVIES. If there's something you'd like to hear Father Davis and me talk about, tell us all about it in the comments section below or send us a direct message on Instagram. And don't forget to click that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. Theologically Speaking is a production of Church Nerds Productions. Executive producers for the show are Jeffrey Clark Tosca, Father Ian Elliott Davis, and Kyle Leon Henderson. Associate producer is Ed Tosca. Editors for the show are Kyle Leon Henderson and Jeffrey Clark Tosca. Music for this program is provided by Dr. Jeffrey Parola and the choir at St. Thomas the Apostle Hollywood. We would also like to give a special thanks to Louie for all the loving licks on the knee under the table while we produce this show. Visit St. Thomas the Apostle Hollywood Facebook page for more information on the show, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram at St. Thomas Hollywood.